What if I told you that the real power of the US government isn't always in the hands of elected officials, but often lies within vast networks of agencies you seldom hear about? In this video, that's exactly what we're going to explore: the federal bureaucracy. The federal bureaucracy is a complex system of departments, agencies, commissions, and other entities within the executive branch of the United States government. It's responsible for the day-to-day administration and execution of federal laws, regulations, and policies, operating through an organized hierarchy that employs millions of federal workers to handle everything from national defense and homeland security to environmental protection and social services. And while we tend to associate bureaucracy with endless paperwork, red tape, long lines, and civil servants operating at a snail's pace,
actually, I just remembered I have a pal at the DMV. Flash is the fastest guy in there. You need something done, he's on it.
I hope so. We are really fighting the clock and every minute counts. Wait. They're all sloths? Said this was going to be quick.
Well, are you saying that because he's a sloth, he can't be fast? I thought in Zootopia anyone could be anything. Flash, 100-yard dash. Buddy, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, too.
Hey, Flash, I'd love you to meet my friend. Darling, I've forgotten your name.
Officer Judy Hobbs, CPD, how are you?
I am doing just
fine
as well as I can be. What
Hang in there.
can I do
Well, I was hoping you could run a play.
for you
Well, I was hoping you could.
today?
Well, I was hoping you could run a play for us. We are in a really big hurry.
Sure. What's the plate
29
number?
29 THD 03.
Two, 9
THD 03.
T
HD 03.
H
D 03.
D
03.
0.
3.
governmental bureaucracies, at least in the modern sense, are generally defined by four key features. First, bureaucracies operate hierarchically with clearly defined spheres of competence and divisions of labor. Bureaucracies are also defined by their continuity, with professional staff ensuring the stable operation of governmental functions. Bureaucracies operate impersonally, using prescribed rules and clearly defined standard operating procedures rather than arbitrary actions in decision-making. And finally, bureaucracies rely on expertise and specialization, with officials chosen according to merit and having specialized training and subject matter knowledge relevant to their positions. But it was not always this way. Indeed, in the early history of the United States, the federal bureaucracy was relatively small, and positions in government were secured through the spoils system, under which an incoming administration would fill the federal workforce with their own supporters and affiliates, firing existing employees and replacing them with friends and political allies. This practice emphasized loyalty over competence and led to widespread inefficiency and corruption in the bureaucracy. Growing public outcry against the spoils system and notable scandals led to demands for reform. The assassination of President James Garfield by a disgruntled office seeker further galvanized public opinion. In response, Congress passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which laid the foundation for a merit-based civil service system, establishing the Civil Service Commission and making it illegal to fire or demote employees for political reasons, while also prohibiting soliciting campaign donations on federal government property. These reforms were further entrenched during the progressive era of the late 1800s and early 1900s, when a broad reform movement aiming to eliminate corruption and bring efficiency and introduce expertise into government took hold. A key part of this was the entrenchment of merit-based hiring decisions, often through competitive civil service exams. At the same time, the size of the federal bureaucracy was rapidly expanding. From the founding through the Civil War, the size of the federal government grew slowly and remained small, less than a few 100,000 people in total. Following the Civil War, the bureaucracy began to increase. But the real growth in the federal bureaucracy began during the Progressive Era, the New Deal era, and especially World War II, when the government took on an increasing breadth of responsibility in regulating the economy, providing for public health and safety, and fighting the war. At the end of World War II, the bureaucracy shrank but never reached the pre-war lows. The federal bureaucracy grew again during the Cold War era and in response to Johnson's Great Society programs, remaining relatively stable through much of the late 20th century, only declining slightly during the Clinton administration's push for deregulation and the devolution of power to the states in the 1990s. And these spikes every 10 years reflect the temporary increase in the federal workforce to conduct the census. Today, the federal bureaucracy is a vast, complex structure designed to handle the administrative tasks of government, from creating regulations to providing services. It is organized primarily within the executive branch, with several layers and types of agencies. We've talked about the 15 executive departments that comprise the president's cabinet in another video. Remember that each of these departments is headed by a secretary, except for the Department of Justice, which is headed by the Attorney General, and that these secretaries comprise the president's cabinet. Each department has specific scopes of responsibility. For example, the Department of Defense oversees the armed forces, the Department of Education handles federal education policy, the Department of Health and Human Services manages health and welfare programs, and so on. Departments are large organizations themselves, containing various sub-agencies and offices to handle specific tasks within their broader domain. For example, the Department of Interior includes not just the department itself, but also the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Park Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, while the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are located inside the Department of Health and Human Services. Next are independent agencies, which are federal agencies that are not part of any executive department and report directly to the president. All told, there are more than 100 independent agencies in the U.S. government. Examples of such agencies include the Central Intelligence Agency, NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, the National Science Foundation, and the Small Business Administration, among others. Typically, independent agencies have narrower focuses than departments and provide specialized services or oversight relative to their institutional role. Regulatory agencies, sometimes called regulatory bodies, are a specific type of independent agency designed to regulate and oversee a particular aspect of the economy or society. There are about a dozen regulatory agencies today, examples of which include the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Communications Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They create and enforce rules to protect public interest in their area of responsibility. Although they're still part of the executive branch, these agencies operate independently of the federal executive departments, with specific mandates and responsibilities that often require a degree of operational independence to carry out effectively. Finally, government corporations operate in a manner similar to commercial businesses, but are owned by the government and are intended to provide services that cannot profitably or efficiently be provided by the private sector. Such government corporations are often financed through user fees or other revenue raised independent of government funding. There are about a dozen government corporations, examples of which include the U.S. Postal Service, Amtrak, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Regardless of the type of bureaucratic institution, the federal bureaucracy plays a crucial role in the effective functioning of the U.S. government. Perhaps the most important role of the bureaucracy is to implement and enforce the laws passed by Congress. Often, legislation passed by the Congress simply instructs the government to achieve a broad goal, leaving the bureaucracy responsible for transforming that legislative goal into specific, actionable rules. As part of legislative implementation, bureaucratic agencies must manage the day-to-day enforcement and administration of federal laws, which can include conducting inspections, imposing fines, or taking legal action against violators. Agencies are also responsible for enforcing these regulations. Congress has also delegated many bureaucratic agencies with the authority to create rules and regulations that have the force of law. This regulatory function is essential for managing complex sectors of society and the economy, and examples of this include environmental protection by the Environmental Protection Agency, financial markets by the SEC, and public health by the FDA. The federal bureaucracy also provides a wide array of services directly to the American people. This includes delivering the mail by the U.S. Postal Service, providing Social Security and Medicare benefits by the Social Security Administration, and offering disaster relief and recovery by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Agencies play an important information gathering role, collecting and analyzing data that are critical for informed policymaking and public understanding. Examples of this include economic data collected by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, health statistics collected by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and environmental monitoring provided by the U.S. Geological Survey. Some agencies are even responsible for technological and scientific advancement, such as NASA's space exploration or the NIH's medical research. Bureaucrats often have some level of discretionary authority in how they implement laws, leading to policymaking within the confines of their mandate. This is especially true in complex or ambiguous situations where federal agencies need to interpret legislative intent. Further, bureaucratic experts often advise the President and Congress on policy matters related to their areas of expertise, contributing to the formation of new laws and policies. But even in the context of the power of the bureaucracy, or perhaps because of it, there are a variety of checks on the power of the bureaucracy in the U.S. political system. Congress has significant authority over the federal bureaucracy, with the power to create, organize, and disband federal agencies through legislative action. Congressional committees regularly hold hearings to investigate bureaucratic operations and question administrators, holding them accountable for their actions. But Congress's greatest power over the bureaucracy rests in its power of the purse. Congress controls the federal budget and funding of bureaucratic agencies, thus influencing their operation and priorities. The President appoints the various heads of agencies and departments subject to senatorial confirmation. This allows the President to influence the direction and priorities of the bureaucracy. Further, the President can issue executive orders directing the bureaucracy on how to enforce or interpret the laws. And through its power of judicial review, the courts can invalidate bureaucratic rules, orders, and actions they find unconstitutional or not in alignment with the law. Further, courts interpret statutes and the scope of bureaucratic authority, often placing limits on how far an agency can go in its regulations. The bureaucracy is subject to laws that promote transparency, such as the Freedom of Information Act, which allows citizens to request documents and records from federal agencies. The media also play a key role in examining and reporting on bureaucratic actions, often bringing issues to the public's attention and holding officials accountable. And within the bureaucracy, a variety of internal controls and limits restrict the power of the bureaucracy. The merit system and competitive hiring process ensures that the federal bureaucracy is largely staffed by career civil servants who are protected from political interference, promoting expertise and stability, but also limiting the arbitrary use of power. Many agencies have an Office of the Inspector General, which investigates allegations of wrongdoing within the agency, such as corruption or waste. And whistleblower protections exist to protect individuals who report illegal or unethical actions within the government, helping to uncover and address abuses of power. But that's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.